After listening to Bill, I didn't take a hot tub myself last night. I wish I had now. I'd be more relaxed. I want to thank Kenny and Nina for creating this space in which we meet and gather. It's the only... There's nothing like it. And interestingly, it's in the year I give 40, 50, 60 talks. This is in some ways the most difficult talk to give because of the profound respect I have for you, who you are. I know you. It's my hometown. It's my friends. I'm a fifth-generation Californian. For me, talking to you is really awesome, full of awe. I'm reminded of Ben Zander, who's a conductor of the Boston Symphony, and he defines leadership in 3 ways. Leadership is first the ability to hear all the voices. And of course, as a conductor, it means to hear all the instruments, but a true leader hears all the people, all the voices, and of course, that is something sadly lacking in our system. The second is the ability to create new distinctions and new categories, which leads to the third quality of leadership, which is that those new distinctions and those new categories allow them to create an expanding and expansive sense of what is possible, of new possibilities. And I can't tell you how much leadership I feel from you and from the speakers that have been here and from Kenny and Nina, so I want to thank you again for that space that you've created. The quotes that Kenny read from our president, El Presidente, while heartwarming, are disturbing in some ways, because when the Ecology of Commerce was published, it was a pariah book, and nobody would touch it with a 10-foot pole. Not one business publication in the United States would review it. It was treated sort of like soiled laundry, like a dirty nappy, and placed aside. And even though it sort of inched into bestseller status, it actually was studiously ignored. And so the new book, The Natural Capitalism, is in its 4th printing, and I'm wondering what we did wrong. It's like the president is reading it and sort of holding it up at lecterns, and the last book time, the only person who held it up at a lectern was David Brower, for which I am eternally grateful. But I do remember at the 40th draft of this book that we were getting a little punchy, and we, at one point, started to come up with what we called industrial koans. My favorite was, what is the sound of one industry collapsing? And then, as we got even punchier, we began to rename the trade associations in Washington, D.C., and the polyvinyl chloride, the PVC, also known as the Chlorine Council, became the Endangered Plastics Association. And we began to imagine what it would be like for them to feel endangered, which of course they don't feel, but which of course they are. The title, Natural Capitalism, was deceptive by intention. The subtitle has created the next industrial revolution. So then you have capitalism and you have industrialism, which really goes back to the title of my talk about how to distract the ruling classes while we create the green coup d'etat. And when Kenny called me or emailed me 6 months ago and said, you know, we need a title for your speech, and I said, I don't know. And he said, how about, you know, and he suggested that title as a joke. And I said, no, that's good. And he said, no. I said, it's just a joke. And I said, no, let's go with it. It sounds interesting, so that's what I want to talk about, how to distract the ruling classes while we create the green coup d'etat. When we named it natural capitalism, you know, the modifier is ism, not natural. And of course, many people, even our publisher in England, thinks the book's about capitalism, which shows you what they read. But if you actually read the book, it's not about capitalism at all. It is not an apologia for capitalism, and it is not a discussion of it. That's a whole other subject. And nor is it about the care and feeding of multinational corporations, which is what the next industrial revolution would imply. I thought it should actually be accompanied with with one of Gary Snyder's Tibetan army knives with the guaranteed patented mind opener, But Time Warner wouldn't do that because they didn't make the knife, so. But essentially, natural capitalism is a metaphor for an economy that does not exist. It may be emerging. We think it is. But so far does not exist. The term natural capital was coined by E.F. Schumacher, written, I don't know when he coined it, but written in 1974 in Small is Beautiful on Buddhist economics. And at that time, natural capital referred to natural resources. And in fact, even ecologists, if you will, not ecologists necessarily, but people such as Schumacher, thought of nature as things. And Fitchoff and others yesterday were very eloquent about the danger of thinking of nature as things. It just doesn't work. But nevertheless, it was considered natural resources. Of course, today we have a very expanded and different sense of what nature is. Most importantly, we understand nature, as Bill eloquently attested to, as a flow of services that we take for granted, which cannot be, and gratefully, commodified, and are not bought and sold, but which absolutely influence and dictate the quality of our life on this planet, and from whence all so-called economic value is derived. And these flow of services, which we take for granted, include pollination, oxygen, global climatic stability, riparian systems, fisheries, soil fertility, topsoil control, erosion, flood catchments, etc. And what we do know absolutely is that in the last 50 years that every living system on Earth is in decline, and the rate of decline is speeding up. And as I want to say to CEOs, if they ever listen to me or when they do, is that you need not know anything else about the environment except that fact in order to know what to do. And I'll say that again, every living system is in decline, and the rate of decline is accelerating. So we don't really need to know whether it is a certain heavy metal from the paper industry that's causing the morbidity in the pinniped population in the Baltic Sea, or whether, in fact, it's endocrine disruptors from some other source. Those arguments are interesting and need to be defined, but in fact are irrelevant to knowing what it is that we have to do as a society and as a civilization. So natural capitalism as a metaphor was an attempt to describe an integrated application and program of the economics of restoration. And as Kenny said, quoting, I think, me, but nevertheless, sustainability doesn't cut it. Sustainability is not going to get us there. As I say in LA, who wants to sustain Los Angeles to the LA basin? I think you'll see very little out there today that you want to sustain. And furthermore, the problem with sustainability is that it's not very imaginative. That is to say, it implies sort of an endpoint or a balance point or some, just careful, calibrated sense in time where we're taking just enough, and not so much that we degrade. And of course, nature is a dynamic flow of processes in which we are in a dynamic relationship, and this is what we must address. And we can only do so in such a way that we become the restorers of that itself, not as people who are looking for some omega point where we are in balance. There is no such thing. So natural capitalism is an attempt to, and reasons called the next industrial revolution, is to define what would that economics be if the limiting factor to human well-being is in fact the loss of living systems or life itself. And the reason this is important is not only because we are losing them, but because the beginning and the onset of the Industrial Revolution, the limiting factor to human well-being was not nature per se. It was for certain people in certain parts of the world, to be sure. But in general, the limiting factor to human well-being was human-made capital. It was roads and houses, it was hospitals, it was education, it was warmth, it was clothing, it was our basic needs. And so we spectacularly addressed those issues through industrialism. And we did so in a very peculiar and particular way, which we are still doing. I was very happy to hear John Todd warned us about e-commerce, because there is, in a sense, the idea that we are post-industrial. Fukuyama, all the writers today always talk about industrialism as something that has passed us by, and we're in this new age, but nothing could be further from the truth. Because industrialism quintessentially is about the transformation of living systems of natural capital into the means whereby we increase the productivity of human beings. All the artifacts, machines, equipment, the things that gobble up energy and emit them into the atmosphere would be simply museum pieces if they didn't do one thing, and that is allow human beings to do more work. This is our obsessive pursuit. It made a lot of sense 200 years ago. It is absolutely diabolically foolish today. And again, it goes back to what Fitchoff would say about trying to optimize or maximize, right? Optimization is a good idea. It was a wonderful thing to make people more productive. It raised income. It changed the quality and standard of life for many people. Not enough on the planet, more need to be, but certainly for everybody. But the point is that what we have is a world where we're using more and more of what we have less of, which is nature, living systems, to use less and less of what we have more of, which is human beings, right? So when you raise the productivity of human beings, what do? You need less of them. That may not be apparent to us here, where we sort of regale ourselves with unemployment figures, but the fact is that in the last 25 years, the rate of unemployment in the world has gone up higher than the rate of employment. There are 1 billion people in the world today who cannot work, who want to work, who have jobs that are so degrading, so trivializing, that they cannot support themselves and they cannot support their families. And I want to ask you, if anybody here really knows what it's like to be a mother or to be a father or to be a part of a family unit, and to know that no matter what you do during the day, no matter how hard you work, no matter what effort you make, you cannot feed your children, you cannot take care of them, you cannot clad them, you cannot give them shoes, you cannot get them to school. We don't know, but billions of people do know. And this is the world that industrialism is creating, and it's being accelerated by e-commerce and by the internet and by computerization and telecom, because what that is doing is even more maniacally and obsessively increasing the productivity of human beings, causing worldwide polarization of income, right? Not just information gaps, but extraordinary concentrations of wealth, right? I mean, the idea of somebody rushing on the red eye with their Palm Pilot, their laptop, their cell phone, what's that all about, you know? So we ask the question, do we really want to be more productive, you know? And do we really want to swap more productivity for the loss of our forests, our riparian systems, our coral reefs, our fisheries, our sky, you know? I don't think so. I asked 200 CEOs, CFOs, CTOs, CIOs, I don't know, they had O's after their C's, but they were executives of Fortune 500 companies, and I asked them these 3 questions, and I said, how many of you basically want to work harder 5 years from now than you do now? Raise your hand. So I asked them, well, how many of you know somebody in your office who's a slacker and kind of screws off? Nobody raised their hand. I said, well, let me ask you one more question. How many of you know someone, or how many of you spend too much time with your children? Raise your hand. Nobody raised their hand. There was this sort of nervous giggle from men, which is not a pleasant sound. And and so the question is, what are you doing? Because this is the world you're creating. You are creating a world in which we cannot spend time with our children. Thank you very much, right? It's stupid. So what natural capitalism is about is saying, well, if the limiting factor to human well-being development is not human-made capital in the developed world, and it's exceptional in the undeveloped, so-called less developed or developing world, a term I detest, by the way, but nevertheless, then what is the economics where the limiting factor is life itself? And the important thing to understand about climate and oxygen and soil and riparian systems is that these aren't substitutes. We can't say, yeah, we are running out of climate. You're right, Bill. We'll just substitute trees for the climate, you know. This is a complementary system, and the Earth has never globally encountered a situation where the limits to our survival and well-being are complements. And complements are so different. That's about systems thinking, right? A complement is like you're on a mountain, high up, it's winter, you need 3 things to survive: water, food, and warmth. You can't eat your parka, you can't drink your power bars, right? You need each 3. The one that's in the least supply is the limiting factor to your well-being and survival. So we have to look at climate, at our oceans, at our soil, at our so-called food system, another word I detest, but that's what it is now, a food system, and say, which is it is going to break? Which is it going to give? We have to focus on that system, right, first, because it's a complementary system in order to ensure our well-being. So again, natural capitalism is saying, well, if you have an economy where the limiting factor to development is living systems, and a whole array of principles emerge from that, of which there are 4, and I know Hunter and Amory will delve into them, but quickly, they are first, you don't just make things more efficient, you go to leapfrog technologies of radical resource productivity. In other words, you reduce our impact and our footprint on the environment by 80, 90% over the next 40 to 50 years. This was first articulated by Frederick Schmidt-Blake and the Factor 10 Club in 1994 in the Carnoules Declaration, a beautiful, articulate, eloquent declaration which is on the web. I recommend it to you. The second principle is biomimicry. The father of that is here with us, John Todd. Biomimicry is taking, obviously, nature as a mentor, as a model, and looking at that for inspiration, again, out of the box, breakthrough, leapfrog thinking in how we design our molecules, our systems, our processes, and what it is that we do and make and how we process those elements. Janine Benyus is here, the author of Biomimicry, a superb book on the subject, which I highly recommend to you, which articulates this much better than we did in our book. The third principle, again, Fitschoff talked about it yesterday, service and flow, first articulated by Walter Stahel, a Swiss economist, who simply said that, made the obvious observation that if we're going to create an economic system that has any semblance or resemblance to biological systems, it can no longer think of itself as the episodic manufacturer of goods, but actually a deliverer of a flow of services, which is, after all, what we receive from nature. And that in that flow of services, the materials, the molecules, the compounds themselves must be carefully marshaled and monitored such that they're either made for living systems and can biodegrade and be reconstituted, or they are technical nutrients which must be returned to industrial systems. And there is no exception. There is no landfills in the society. There is no baby's bones in which to put our waste chemicals, right? So this is the service and flow concept. And Interface, which he mentioned yesterday, is coming out with a carpet made of non-GM modified corn stalks, I want to say, but corn stalks, polylactic acid, which you can place on your floor. You can replace it, you can send it back to them, remanufactured into carpeting. You can actually put it on your garden and use it as mulch and compost. It's absolutely non-toxic, right? This is the next industrial revolution, right? And with all due respect, you don't always need carpeting either, and that's even better, okay? And the last is the restoration of natural capital, which Dan Daggett talked about, which John Todd talked about, which many of you talked about in breakouts, which is that we cannot just simply organize ourselves to be effective or efficient or productive, but we have to organize our industrial systems in such a way that our oceans, our soil, our waters, our riparian systems, and our climate are restored step by step by step. That this has to be a natural act of what we do, the natural outcome, as opposed to an altruistic outcome, as opposed to a legislated outcome. So this is the kind of economy that we are talking about. But I want to go back to people again, because I know Hunter and Amory are going to drill down on those 4 principles, and I don't want to overlap too much, but I want to go back to this thing about us, about work. Because we're so used to an industrial system which has second and third order effects which are malefic, which are unintended consequences, which cause problems which we did not anticipate and which are very difficult to deal with. We feel anyway, that natural capitalism also has second and third order effects which are benign and beneficial. And this is quite opposite. And one of them has to do with work itself, which I want to talk about. Those 1 billion men and women who can't work, those 2 billion people under 20 years old that are coming into the workplace in the next 20 years, right, for whom we have no jobs at all. Essentially what we've done is we've created an economy that's so ingenious, so brilliantly designed, that we tell 18-year-old men and women that they don't have jobs and they have no value, right? We figured this out, you know, and it's okay if you buy, you know, athletic shoes or, you know, Walkman and CDs, but don't bother us because we've created this really brilliant economy. And because that's essentially what we're saying to children. We're saying you have no value. And we're so surprised when they hear it. They're very smart, and they listen to it, and they feed back to us. And they do. They feed back to us. We have the highest rates of any industrial nation of abortion, drug use, violence, gangs, teen pregnancy. I can go on, the highest by far. So what does that tell us? It tells us something about what we're saying to our children, right? Mm-hmm. And it tells us something we're saying to our young people. What they're saying to us is they don't even want to be here at all on Earth. Right? Astonishing thing. The highest, the greatest cause of mortality among men in the United States between 20 and 27 years old is suicide. Suicide. Not drugs, and not violence, and not AIDS. Suicide. And, you know, in this country where we're so proud, you know, of our full employment, should we be so proud? 36 million people in poverty in the United States, 14 million children, right? 7 million under 6 years old in poverty right now, in this Gilded Age, this greatest time of prosperity that the world has ever seen, right? 27 million people functionally illiterate, 40 million people with no health insurance, 300,000 people homeless wandering our cities, right? It is the United States of America. And 5 million men in the penal system. The largest penal colony in the world is the US of A, 70% of which are people of color. So now, what I'm saying here is this, that an industrial system that wastes its living systems, its natural resources, wastes its people because it's embedded, it's built in, because it's about making people useless. We may have jobs, probably not. We're in NGOs and we're like serfs too, but marginally paid is another subject which I want to talk to our foundations about. But the point is that they don't feel that value, and they act it out. And the largest contributor to Governor Wilson's re-election campaign was the Prison Guards Association in California, right? That's called industry, it's called growth, it's called economic development. So what we see is the wasting of our resources and our people is now economic development. Right? And this is what natural capitalism expresses, because when you start to go away from increasing the productivity of human beings and radical increases in resource productivity, you need more people, a lot more people. You don't just need them. These are meaningful living wage, family wage jobs that provide people dignity, self-respect, you know, that make them feel different about themselves. There's no way we can address our social issues until there's more jobs and people. And every one of us who goes to college and studies economics is told that that's impossible. To have a healthy economy, you have to have unemployed people. And I ask you this, why is it that we're the only species on Earth without full employment then? Right? it is a form of brain damage, right? That assumption that we cannot have a society where everybody feels value, everybody feels they have a purpose and intention, and that they are respected. The definition of sustainability that Fitchoff gave yesterday was great, and he just said it, sustaining the web of life. Let's be clear about that, without which there is no other. Society, growth, economics, so-called development, right? But that's the definition. But how do we do it? And what do we do? And what we don't do is go to white, charismatic male vertebrates in environmental NGOs in Washington, D.C. and ask them, okay? That is not how we know what to do. What we should do is ask the people who bear the brunt on the suffering of the industrial age, and that's children and women. And you ask them, and they will tell us what to do. They know what to do, except we don't listen, right? People said to me, yeah, but what about the population problem? What about it? The women met in Cairo in 1995, laid out a plan that the total expenditures of which were 4 years of cigarette advertising, and not one male leader in the world, not one CEO stood up and said, we should listen to the women. They capped population at 7.6 billion. No one listened, right? So there's a lot of talk about in our book and techniques and this and that. They're all extraordinarily important, but they're meaningless unless we listen to children and women, right? Bill McKibben wrote on Hope about Curitiba. We have an entire chapter devoted to Curitiba. Extraordinary city, Jaime Lerner, the mayor and architect, who really focused and gathered the people who essentially reimagined what a city could be, used one single criteria for what he did, and that is, does it care for, does it love children? And if it did not take care of children, they went back to the drawing board and started over. And that is the criteria that we should do. That's what we should use when we try to reimagine what it is that we are to do and how we're going to do it. The world is riddled with corporations like Monsanto. They've become the poster boy. It's a loser-take-all world now. They just discovered by their own tracking polls, they're the most reviled corporation in the world today. They pretty far out, you know, to do that in just 5 years. I think that's pretty impressive, and we have to thank, I think, for that, really a very small group of activists in the UK. I think if they hadn't been there, if they hadn't stopped it, I think GM Foods would be a done deal. And it's not a done deal, and we are going to stop it, but we have them to thank for really putting their foot in the door and stopping them dead in their tracks. Now, the thing about them, and Kenny mentioned this work, we do work with corporations. Sometimes we are vilified for that. But it's funny, Catherine Sneed is going to talk tomorrow, and when she first came to Smith & Hawken years and years ago, she came with this big, long van with 14 guys in blue jumpsuits with prison numbers on it, and said, can you give us some tools? I said, yeah, sure. Whatever you want, you know. And they took out a couple $1,000s worth of tools and said, bye. It's like, we all kind of, whoa, who is that, you know? And then she said, when she left, she said, I don't know anything about gardening, but we're going to learn. And I said, well, you got the best tools anyway. But in my years working with Catherine, no one ever questioned the fact that she and I and others worked with what we call children at risk, right? These are the people who've decided they don't want to stay here, and they've sold crack cocaine, or they engage in pimping or prostitution, or you know, gang violence, or whatever it is. You know. But I just want to say is that we also work with corporations at risk. That's what I want to tell you. And I want you to be as charitable to me about that as children at risk. And these are corporations who are obviously repeat offenders. They're recidivist. They are chemically addicted. So, you know, they have... they knock the world up and don't take responsibility for their offspring. And they don't show any respect for civic society. And we have to sometimes work with them. And they are accompanied, of course, by a corrupt, completely oligarchical government, which is, we think we, you know, in a democracy we're not, we know that, but we should really be clear about that. You know, we are with a government that consistently sets very low standards and fails to achieve them, right? And this is, you know, what it is that we have to work with. But I want to say to you that, and this is the green coup d'etat part, it's very short, it's very sweet, it's very simple. And that is that there are 30,000 environmental NGOs in the United States, maybe 100,000 in the world today. This movement, in the broadest sense of the word, which we call sustainability, is one of the fastest growing movements in the world today, along with actually religious fundamentalism. It's very interesting that these two are. Yeah? But at the core of religious fundamentalism is the same kind of malaise and sense of a disturbance and dislocation that we share with them. It is. It may take different avenues. What I want to say about this is that because we are so underfunded, because we are so marginal, because we never know when our next grant is coming or how we're going to make it, there's a sense that we are fragile, that we could fail at any moment, that somehow we're not going to make it. And I understand that. One of the things that really angers me, really, but it frustrates me, is that our liberal foundations, our grant makers, you know, are still granting programs, but we don't give money to our thinkers. The right gives money to its thinkers, but we don't give money to our Bill McKibbins, our Terry Tempest Williams, our David Browers, you know. We don't give them money, right? Gary Barra has $30 million a year, you know. I mean, it's astonishing, these people. Poor money, to give them to think, right? But our best thinkers, you've seen some of them, we absolutely don't support them. They have to write a program, right, and get semi-funded by a foundation. Every foundation, Columbia, Turner, should have fellows. We should be giving money to you, to people, to do their work and leave them alone and not have to write a program, right? If you don't trust them, don't give them the money. If you trust them, then trust them, give them the money, and no grantsmanship, please. But what I want to say is, I want to propose to you this possibility. And I said leadership is about possibilities. This possibility is simple, and that is that we're going to win. Right? And I don't mean conquer, and I don't mean defeat, and I don't mean win over in the sense of making somebody lose. I mean that this way of thinking, this understanding that life itself will prevail, and the losses that will occur in the next decades are unimaginable. They'll be heartrending, they'll be heartbreaking, but we will prevail. In the worst moments of the pogroms in Poland, Gdansk, and Warsaw, Jews would say to each other, next year in Israel. What was that about? That was hope and that was faith, knowing next year in Israel. What an amazing thing to say as you were being taken off to a concentration camp. So for us, it's next year in Israel. We will prevail. And the reason I say this is because we have to start acting like we are going to win, instead of thinking we're going to be right when the ship goes down, right? Because if we know that, and if we understand that, that is how leadership, true leadership, will arise. And the example I use of this is Václav Havel. When he was in Czechoslovakia, and his compatriots, they practiced democracy day after week, after year. They were arrested for it, they were jailed for it, they came out of jail, and they kept practicing it. And so we have to practice and understand that we will prevail, and the leaders will arise, and they will not be, as I said, hopefully charismatic white male vertebrates, the kind that we have seen, but a very different type of leadership, all right? So that's what I want to say. And I want to end with a very funny, not funny, excuse me, but odd thing for me to do, which is I want to tell you a fairy tale, a story, and then the hook is almost coming, so I'll be out of here. Okay. And it's about a prince and a princess. So this is, if there's any children here, I wish I could see you, because this is really a children's tale. And this is about a prince who was engaged to this woman, to be a princess, you know, to be married, and he was sent off by his father to do one more campaign, one more, this is for Raffi, okay? But this one more campaign, victory, something evil out there, and yet he went out there on his white charger, and he went away. And of course, in all fairy tales, the princess and the prince represent what we heard from our native elder this morning, right? Balance, the thing of coming together, of wholeness. And he went off and he was captured just before he was going to get married and thrown into the dungeon and told that he was going to be executed. And he was in great despair. And that night, he heard this at his dungeon door, and he looked out the bars of his window, and there was this woman. Now, this woman was truly ugly. This woman, you can't imagine, snaggle-toothed with foul breath, and her hair was falling out, and she was ophthalmic, and a big hooked nose, and warts, and hairs are coming out of her warts, and you think, oh my God, who is this? And she said in a voice that sounded like fingernails going across the blackboard that she could save him and save his life, but he had to grant her one wish. Right? So he said, I will. So she pulled out this key and unlocked it and took him through a secret passage, and he found his way out, and then he said, Madame, what is your wish? She said, my wish, in this voice that sounded like an old bucket, that my wish is that you marry me. And he was stunned. But being a true prince and being a man of honor and of integrity, he said, I grant your wish. So he took her back to the kingdom. So here's the prince coming back. People were overjoyed he came back, and here was this truly, truly repulsive-looking woman on the back of his horse, and he was saying that I'm going to marry her. So the kingdom went into depression. Everybody was so sad. The princess was just beside herself. She was out of it. And the wedding day came, and there it was, and she was dressed in white, and of course it made her even more ugly, really. And she came up to the altar, and the vows were said, and the king and queen were beside themselves here, the son, and sort of marrying this astonishing thing. And the ceremony was over, and she lifted her veil, and she said, now you must kiss me. So he thought about that for a while. And he leaned over and kissed her, and instantly she was transformed into this beautiful woman because she had a curse on her, right? And they went away, and everybody was overjoyed. They went to the bridal chamber, and she said, I have something to tell you. You have a choice. You know the story. You can have me as beautiful as you see me during the day with your friends and society, but at night I will change into the woman you first met. Or I can be the woman you first met during the day and your friends, but at night in our bed, in our bridal chamber, I will be so beautiful. She said, so you must choose, right? So this is my riddle for you. So without saying it out loud, how many of you think he chose the woman to be beautiful during the day? Raise your hand. How about at night? Whoa. Okay. Turn out the lights. Interesting. What he said to her is, you choose. And if you want to make a woman beautiful, you say, you choose, right? If you want to make the earth beautiful, She has to choose. If we want to restore the earth, the women and the children have to choose. Right? Thank you.